This is Zoe from Pass English GCSE here, looking at another student exemplar, or at least attempt, for Language Paper 2. This is for AQA and for the writing section. So we're going to have a look at this today. The question is here. Childhood is important and should be protected. Write a speech arguing your views on this statement. So, first thing I suggest to people when they get these kind of questions, which are for language paper 2, always work out type, audience, and purpose. So, when I look at this question, it's a 40-mark question, 24 marks for content and organization, and 16 marks for spelling, punctuation, and grammar. Same for paper 1 as well. Okay, it's a 40-mark question. It's half of your language paper. So it is worth spending the time on these writing questions and getting them right. Okay, so I said about type, audience, purpose. This is the type of document. Is it a speech? Is it a diary extract? Is it a report? Is it a letter? Is it an article for a broadsheet newspaper? That's the type of document. Okay, so always make it clear, and I'll explain why I really emphasize this point to students, but it's basically to do with the mark scheme. Type, audience, purpose, tap. You'll see that when I show you on the next page. So it says write a speech arguing. You're writing to argue. That's the purpose. Okay. Now the audience, it doesn't say the audience. I don't know who this is for. It would help to know who it's for. If it doesn't tell you, just assume it's a generic audience, ladies and gentlemen, that sort of thing. Usually AQA will tell you, they will say it's for your peers, your local counsellor, your head teacher, and you will adjust your register as appropriate for that audience. You know, if it's your peers, you can invoke cultural references that you guys would know. Whereas if it's your local counsellor, obviously you want to write formally regardless of audience, but you would be a bit more guarded about your cultural references and make sure that they would make sense to that audience. Okay, so I've got type, I've got purpose, and I'm assuming a generic audience. The reason I'm pointing this out now is because, as you can see, this is the AQA language mark scheme. Tap, type, audience, purpose. You have to match tap, okay? If you don't, you're going to hemorrhage marks on AO5, which is why I say when you're preparing for this question, it's worth having a bit of thinking time. I know you don't have a lot of time on this paper. It's about a minute a mark. Time is really tight, but it's better to think about it and get it right than to not think about it and get it wrong. So I would assume maybe some kind of planning. It could be a mind map. It could be just jotting down ideas. Now, because it's arguing, what I'm expecting to see from this is pros and cons, both sides. Different to persuade. Persuade is one side, usually the pros, why you want your audience to do something or buy into an idea. Whereas argue is slightly different. You're still having those pros, but you're having the cons and you're proving why the counter argument, that means what the other side is saying or what could be argued against you, you're proving why that's wrong. So I always say that politicians persuade, but lawyers argue. So argue is more analytical in nature, and that's why I have to plan it, because I have to think about what are my main arguments and then what are my counter arguments to rebut those. Just to give you some ideas, I use persuader sheet for argue and persuade. And this is a mnemonic. So each letter PER all the way down to persuader stands for a different technique. And I've given examples. Okay, so personal pronouns, you may want to address your audience, for example, you, we. Rhetorical questions is a good one. You know, how would you feel if this happened to you, for example? There's various different answers you can use or apply to these particular techniques. I've given ones relating to why cats are better than dogs on this particular sheet because that's what I was doing for my preparing for my students at the time. So you've got persuader sheet. Now, AQA have given back in their feedback that they say they don't like students just going through a tick list of features because it can make it read as very unnatural, very contrived, and it's just students going through the motions. But that said, in my plan, I would have some kind of mind map where I would put the type of audience and purpose in the middle. I put persuader down the side. I'd write all my ideas out, and then I tick off where I could apply a persuader technique, and maybe right at the end of my plan, sequence my argument in the order in which I'm going to raise those points. Bear in mind, guys, I appreciate this. You're doing this in 3 to 5 minutes. It's okay to change from what you originally planned. You can maybe have a new idea come up or something different, but just always go back to type audience purpose. What was I trying to do at the beginning of this exercise, and am I still on task? That's what's going to make the biggest difference to your marks for this. So let's have a look at what the student's written. Childhood is important and should be protected. Arguing your views. So you can say it should or it shouldn't be protected. Okay, be really clear on the question. Go back to it a few times, reread it. Childhood is important and should be protected. Write a speech arguing your views. So you need to sit and decide how you feel. Let's see what this student's written. Childhood. I'm sure we all believe that so many grown-up children had an extremely horrific childhood ever. Yeah, I sort of get it. I've got to check some of the spag here and that it makes sense. Childhood, like that. I'm sure we all believe that so many grown-up children had the most extremely horrific childhood. Get rid of ever there. There we go. Strictly speaking, I was one of the children who had a devastating childhood period. One of the reasons is simply because I wasn't protected enough in my country due to its conflict. Okay, so this is really interesting. We've got a first person account, so it's personal, and we've got I mean, the it could be described as an anecdote, but actually this just feels real. So it's really nice for the authenticity to hear. I spent a couple of years in the war that led to, oh, I would say instead of that, put which destroyed my mental health. Don't need to state there. It took me almost, can I just say, if you're writing numbers under 100, try and write them as the word. Just looks better. It took me almost 4 years to get over my horrible, horrific issues. So you guys can see I'm correcting spelling, punctuation, and grammar as I'm going along here, but the gist of it, it's very much on purpose. It's telling me a story. It reads almost like a TED Talk. If you haven't seen a TED Talk, Google TED Talk and watch a few of them. Obviously, the TED Talks last a lot longer than anything you'd be expected to write, but still, I think they give you a really good insight into speeches and how they can be effective. And this student is very good in that they are disclosing something very personal. They're drawing the audience in and making the audience interested. I genuinely believe that people who have had a really divesting, do you mean devastating? I'm not sure what this word is. That doesn't make sense. Something else, childhood, will actually take a long time to cope with life. Sure. According to Action for Children, nice, we're citing an authority figure. Look, I say to do this. Using an authority figure to make your argument spot on. Well done. According to Action for Children, 77% of grown-up children across the world have had an extremely chaotic life. Do you mean do you mean extremely chaotic childhood, which led to a bad adulthood? Or do you mean an extremely chaotic life, which has resulted from having a bad childhood? I'm not sure which one you mean there. So I'm just going to highlight that because you need to look at that. But yes, this makes sense. And I like this authority figure. So what have we got so far? We've got personal account, pronouns, statistics. I also say to use statistics. They don't feel like they've just been shoved in, though, these statistics and facts. It feels natural, so well done. Let me get straight to the point, like this. We have an important responsibility in our life, don't we? Rhetorical question. Well done. Good. Let me get straight to the point. You could have semicolon here. Remember, it means equals or a dash. Let me get straight to the point. We all have an important responsibility in our life, don't we? But, little d, definitely, but definitely not more important than our phenomenal and remarkable children. I think definitely. Check that. Yes, I agree. I thought that was a typo. There you go. Definitely not more important than our phenomenal and remarkable children. Absolutely. It's our duty. Look at these pronouns, guys. To protect their childhood, their future. This is reading a bit as a persuade in the sense that you're persuading me that childhood should be protected. So I'm seeing that. Um, do we all know our children's friends? Do we all talk to our children regularly? Do we actually pay attention to their boring stories? These are good questions. And you've got 3 here, list of 3, like it. Unfortunately, not everybody does. Dr. Molly said, so another authority figure, parents who don't talk to their children regularly will make the children feel left out, unprotected, and neglected. Good. Okay, good. So I think you're arguing that childhood is important and should, you said it's important, and here you're saying it should be protected. I think you could make the argument clearer in this example. We should all monitor. I think you mean monitor. Monitor their accounts and their social media. We should talk to them about difficult topics, but if they feel, remember you've put talk, not talked, that's present tense, and then felt is past tense. So your tenses need to align. We ought to talk, and then you've given what it should feels like this should follow in present tense. We should talk to them about difficult topics, but if they feel uncomfortable, we shouldn't co-unite. Perhaps we need to find another way. Not sure what co-unite means there. Work together. We should talk to them about difficult topics, but if they feel uncomfortable, we shouldn't overwhelm them, maybe. Perhaps we need to find another way. Most grown-up children feel uncomfortable to talk to their parents due to the fact that those parents may have, I would say, may have, because there could be lots of reasons that you feel uncomfortable talking with your parents. It might just be you don't get on. It doesn't mean that they've neglected you necessarily. But we should care for them and protect their childhood. Oh, hang on, because you just talked about parents. But we should care for our children and protect the child. Good. Right. So here I can really see your argument. You've made it explicit here. I'm wondering if you need something similar. I've copied. Oops. What did it undo? What did I press? There we go. I feel like you want something similar here, but not this line. Almost a refrain, but something like this. To make it super clear to your audience where you're going. Our duty is to make them feel free, safe, and loved. Yep, great list of 3. However, not by controlling them. Making them feel that they are controlled by someone will actually make them more aggressive and unfriendly. Treat your children, like your friends. Make them feel loved, protect them. I'm thinking about the validity of your argument here because I know parents who treat their kids as their friends, but then discipline isn't always so good. So be clear what you mean exactly, because I've heard people say the opposite to this, and that you shouldn't treat your children like your friends because actually they're not your friends, they're your children and they need healthy boundaries. But I totally agree with that. Feel loved and protect them. And they should also be your friends as well as your children. I think that would be a more compelling argument there. Because remember, it's argue. So you've got to think what your audience might be thinking that's the opposite of what you're saying. So you're saying treat your children like your friends. You're going to get people like me in the audience thinking, no, I'm not going to treat my kid like my friend. They need healthy boundaries and they need to know, I wouldn't tell my friend how to behave necessarily, or I might, but I wouldn't necessarily be putting boundaries in place for my friend if they're an adult. But if my child is my child, then I would probably be seeking to put boundaries in that in their life to keep them safe, if that makes sense. I'm not a mother, so I'm reading this as a childless person, but just thinking aloud here. Think about if you're writing to argue, you've got to think about what someone might be saying against what you're advocating. All right. Thank you for listening. It was my pleasure to have you all. Right. I really love this, but I just want to bring your attention to something. This is a brilliant start, but it's a transcript. You're writing a speech to address to an audience. I think you want to say something like, good morning all. some kind of acknowledgement at the beginning. I don't want it to be boring because I really like your start, childhood. Watch the TED Talks. They do acknowledge people. Good morning, all. Maybe I tell you a good thing to do is open with a question to the audience. I don't mean, who wants to be a millionaire kind of, ask the audience, they all vote. I don't mean that kind of question. I mean, maybe a rhetorical question, something to get them thinking, something like, can you remember how your parents protected you when you were a child? And then assume that everyone's going to think, oh, yeah, I remember my children, my parents protected me. And then you'd like go into, well, childhood. However, some people aren't protected by their parents, and then you can go into your story. I think you need some kind of opening here. Okay, for a speech, it's a transcript. It needs to be really clear to the examiner. This is definitely a speech, and you're definitely arguing. Persuader. Did you cover them all? Yes, 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 yes. Alliteration, anecdotes. Anecdotes would count as your story, so I think that's fine. Description, imagery. Yes, around here I would say description and imagery. Exaggeration, not so much, but actually I don't know if it would be effective in your speech. So I can see, and list of 3 you do. So this is pretty good. Your features, what you've used are effective. You've covered them. I think you might need to rebut a couple of counter arguments. So the bit I meant about the bit I mentioned earlier about here. Rebut counter argument. Why might some parents or adults, I'm going to write adults because I'm not a parent, disagree with treating children as friends? Healthy boundaries would be my argument. You don't pull your friend, well, you might, but you don't hold your friend's hand while they cross the road and say, right, left, right, check for traffic. You wouldn't be that paternalistic to a friend unless they genuinely, consented to it or there's special circumstance, but you would to your children. So I think you need to be careful there. Quantity, decent amount. I think you need to make it clear where you're going. There is where you start to have your argument. It's because you use this word here, which I don't understand, divesting. I genuinely believe that people have a really distressing, maybe you mean distressing, and therefore we ought to take steps to protect children and ensure their childhood is a safe and happy place. Something like that, okay? You need to make your argument really clear at the beginning. Really clear. Okay, pink means argument. Oh God, that's a horrible color. Maybe I'll take that off. That with ugh. Pink and red do not work at all. But you need something more in respect to the overall structure of it. Greet them, go through. I'll tell you a good tip to help you in the exam. Mentally go through subheadings that you'd assign to each paragraph. So you've got, this is a way of helping you. Greeting, then you've got your story, then you've got argument itself. I like this bit as well. That's pretty much an argument. How we protect our children is really what you've done there. What we ought to do and why. And then you need something like final thoughts or why. No one's going to argue with you that, oh, yeah, neglect's great, but no one's going to say that. But you need to think of the opposite. Childhood is important and should be protected. Right, you're going to get people that say, for example, where if my kid falls over and, hurts themselves while they're playing, I'm not going to wrap them in the metaphorical cotton wool and protect them from everything. I'm going to let them experience life and have an authentic existence. So final thoughts, why we should protect but not stifle. Stifle means to like suffocate, to ensure that your child has an authentic life but is not suffocated by excess parental protection. Okay, so maybe your final thoughts could be there. Okay, so that's a way of thinking. This is effective. What I'm doing here is a reverse plan, because I would do this in a mind map. I would plan out my points, like the points that I'm underlining now. Okay, final thoughts, and then thank you. Because it's a transcript, you need that. So obviously, in your final essay, you wouldn't be writing these. You wouldn't be putting subheadings in. I've just put them in to give you an idea of how to structure it. These subheadings I might put in a mind map, and then it wouldn't be as neat as this, in the sense that it might not have this exact order. I might have different ideas. I always number my ideas right at the end of my planning. I sequence it right at the end when I thought of everything I can. And then that would lead to me having a structure overall. So grading it, what would I give it? Well, grade boundaries shift and change all the time. It is consistent. It is clear. It's definitely clear. It's mostly successful. You have got a variety of ideas linked. Oops. Would I put it here? Writing generally matches tap, definitely. Vocabulary chosen for effect. You've got some use of linguistic devices. Did you use similes, metaphors? I'm trying to think if you did. You used statistics, which were effective. You've got an emotional quality to it, which I really like. I think you need to make your argument consistently clear. I had to tease it out a little bit, if I'm being really honest. Engaging with the rain, definitely engaging. I love the story at the beginning. So I'd say it's probably around a 4 on this. Let's have a look at Spag though. I had to go through on punctuation. I think that's something that needs work. And some of your words were off. So again, it's probably around a 4. I know people reading this will think, this is really quite emotional and poignant and strong. But the way they mark you, it needs to be carefully sequenced, and the punctuation needs to be on point. So I hope this has helped, and I hope for other people doing language paper 2, this gives you some ideas of how you'd work with the transactional writing section, the paper 2. Always go back to the question. All right, type audience purpose, ensure you're on point, and right at the end before you submit, proofread it, make sure that it makes sense too. Okay, that's all for now. Bye.